We're in this real world faith series, and just basically talking about this idea of what happens, when life punches you in the face. And that's really the whole terminology for it. And that it's easy to live for Christ in this plastic bubble, but then all of a sudden when the bubble bursts and life gets real, when, whether it's in your personal life or it's in, just the way what's happening in the world around you, it's just, how do you live by faith in a real world? That's the whole concept. And they're not the same. I've watched lots of people over the years that talked a good game during church on Sunday or during youth camp during the summer or during some kind of worship event we had. Boy, they just talked a great game, but then when real life hit them, they didn't respond very well. And so I've always wondered, I'm going to go back as a kid, like, what? And then you have some people say, well, you can lose your salvation. That's not biblically true. I know some of you may have been taught that. Biblically, that's not true. The real question is whether you are saved or not, because your salvation is not based on your works, right? So your works can't unsave you. Salvation is based on the work of God in you. You're saved by grace through faith. You're saved when you place your faith in Jesus. That's how salvation happens. But the point is, a lot of people think they're saved, they're not. That's the problem. A lot of people consider themselves followers of Christ, but they're not. They're just not. And they'll say, well, I got baptized. That does not save us. Sorry. I love you, but baptism doesn't save us. Being the biggest giver in the church does not save us. Being the pastor of a church does not save us. How do you know we're saved? Do you recognize the activity of the Spirit of God in you? Have you come to a place, not with your brain, but you've placed your faith in Him? The phrase the Bible talks about your heart, what it really means is the center of your being. It's not that you believe a set of facts. We go back to last week's message. Last week's message, one of the passages out of James I used was that the demons believe in Satan, or the demons believe in Jesus. Believing in Jesus, believing in the cross, believing that He raised from the dead does not save us. So we're saved by what we believe, but not what we believe here, but what we believe here. And that obviously is the ultimate question, right? When you die, you want to make sure you got that handled, and none of us know when that day is coming. But when real world stuff happens, and we don't live by faith, does that make us not saved? Well, of course not. The Bible doesn't say you'll be perfect, does it? So how do you reconcile all that? How do you work through that? So I'm going to try to help us do that a little bit today. So I'm going to read this story. I'm going to talk about Obadiah. And I'm talking about Obadiah's struggle with what I'm calling real world faith. And I could have used a lot of other people. I could have went back to Moses. I could have used him last week. I used Abraham last week. I could show their stories in the exact same moments. But I also want to tie it to our vision a little bit today, and you'll see how we do that toward the end. So I'm going to read the first, 16 or so verses of chapter 18. I'm going to tell you what happened before. I'm going to tell you what happened afterwards, right? So if you go back a little bit earlier, like I said in chapter 16, you'll find out that Ahab, the king, who's the king in chapter 18, he did worse. The phrase is that he did more to arouse the anger of the Lord than all of the kings before him. That's the terminology. That's how bad he was. And really, he wasn't that bad of a dude, right? He did a lot of good stuff. He helped in commerce, and he did a lot of good stuff. But he also did a lot of bad stuff. Like to keep from wars happening, rather than them trusting God, because they had this long history of God providing for them and God protecting them and them winning the wars they were involved in. Instead of that happening, some of the kings, because in Israel, the nation of Israel is divided into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. So that happens in Kings for the first time. They have a divided kingdom, they call it. And in the divided kingdom over the 400-year window, there's like 39 kings, and all but 8 of them were bad, right? So almost all the kings are bad. This guy has done more bad than all the kings before him. But what you say, Tim, you say he's a pretty good guy. Well, he governed pretty well. As in, like, they did a lot of good stuff during his reign. But the things he did bad was, like, his wife is named Jezebel. You ever heard of her, okay? She's psycho. But that's not the point, okay? he married Jezebel. Why did he marry Jezebel? Well, he married Jezebel because it's like a treaty between him and the king of Sidon. Okay, so he made a treaty, and so the treaty is, I'll marry your wife, and we'll bring in Baal worship, and if we'll do those things, you don't attack us, we don't attack you. That's the treaty. That's what happened. So instead of just trusting God, he says, okay, I'm going to work with these other nations around me to create a treaty so we don't are at war all the time. So in his mind, what he's trying to do is prevent us being in war, or them being in war. And so he marries the crazy girl, and they're at peace. But with that comes in, we're going to start worshiping Baal. We're going to start worshiping Asherah. We're going to build temples for them to worship, for people to worship at. We're going to have prophets and professional worshipers who will lead our nation in worship. I mean, that's what he's doing. Well, God is furious. Again, he's done more to anger the Lord, to arouse the anger of the Lord, than all the kings before him. So God has this guy named Elijah show up in chapter 17. Elijah shows up, and he's a prophet of God. We don't know much about him, right? It just announces him as there he is. And Elijah, he prophesies, because of the Lord's anger against them, that there will be no more rain until God says so. Well, that's easy, like, okay, whatever, until it's not raining, right? And the grass is turning brown. And then they're having to kill their animals because there's no grass to eat, right? Water's drying up. The ponds are empty. The lakes are going dry. The smaller streams are drying up. It's a bad time, right? They're furious. Rather than recognizing the problem is their disobedience toward God, they're mad at the prophet of God who said, this is what's going to happen because of your sin. All things the Bible don't tell us, obviously, but I've often wondered, so what would have happened if they would have chosen repentance then rather than wait? But they didn't. So they're in the third year. So more than 3 years have passed. They're in the third year, okay? They're in the third year, and God speaks to Elijah. Elijah's been hanging out. He'd been hiding because they've been searching for him to kill him, right? Because it's like it's his fault. We kill him, then this goes away, which would not have done that. But he's hiding with a widow, okay? The widow lady, chapter 17, she was just going to eat one more meal with her and her son. They're going to die because they're out of food. And Elijah says, well, you feed me first. And if you'll feed me first, then your cupboard won't run bare. That makes zero sense at all, right? And I think you're a parent, you got a child, you recognize that there is no more food. If no more food's coming, there's no way to get any more food. We got one more meal, and then we're just going to die. Dude walks up, a stranger, says, hey, feed me first. Take care of me, and God will take care of you. That will come up at the end too today. I don't know that I had chosen to do that, but she did. And God provided for them now we're in the third year. Their food never ran out. Every time they opened the cupboard door, there was food in the cupboard for them. Now the Lord comes to Elijah and says, it's time. You go, present yourself to Ahab, tell him that it's go time and what we're going to do. Now, what's going to end up happening is Obadiah is going to do what he needs to do. Ahab's going to confront Elijah. Elijah's going to say, here's the plan. We're going to go meet on the mountain, draw everybody around. The whole nation's going to show up. We're going to have this bow between our prophets, our gods. And, your prophets of Baal can do their altar, their worship their God, and they can do all their stuff. And I'll build an altar to God, and we'll go through this process, and fire of God falls, and all kind of thing. That's the story at the end, right? Okay, all that happens. And after it happens, then it begins to rain. So God has all this set up. In between the setups is this dude named Obadiah. And I want to read to you his struggle with real world faith. So, chapter 18, verse 1. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab. I will send rain on the land. Now, right there, Elijah could say, whoa, God, it hadn't rained 3.5 years. How do I know? You send me to Elijah? Okay, that's not what he said. So Elijah went and presented himself to Ahab. Now, the famine was severe in Samaria. Samaria is kind of the center if you think about a long nation we'd call Israel, but Israel is the northern kingdom, Judah is the southern kingdom. Samaria is that middle section region. The famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. So he's like second in command, Obadiah is. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord, while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets. Told you she's crazy. Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Now, again, I'm not trying to make Ahab look like a good dude. He's not a good dude. He did all kinds of bad things. But he was good enough dude that he kept Obadiah close by. So Jezebel's crazy. Jezebel's killing the prophets of God, and he has a devout believer that is his close person, his second in command, and he kept them close by. Now, maybe God did all that and, protected. I don't know how that all worked, but I'm just saying he kept that guy nearby. And then while his wife was killing people, right, then Obadiah is hiding people and feeding them. Did Ahab know that? I don't know. Maybe he didn't. Right? Maybe he did and just winked it away because he's like, yeah, she's crazy. You're right. I mean, it's not like they dated and fell in love with each other. They had a relationship because of a treaty. Okay. Anyway, so now they're meeting together. Let's see. Verse 5. Ahab said to Obadiah, let's go throughout the land, all the springs and the valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep our horses and mules alive so they will not have to kill any of our animals. The cows are all gone. All that kind of livestock is all gone. Now they're trying to keep their work animals and their transportation animals alive, right? And this is such a crisis moment that he's not sending a bunch of underlings and soldiers. It's him and his second command. We're going to go do this ourselves. Okay. Verse 6, so they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going one direction and Obadiah the other. Was that by coincidence or is that the hand of God too? So Obadiah was walking alone and Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed to the ground and said, is it really you, my Lord Elijah? Now, if Elijah went the other way, or if Ahab went the other way and they'd flip-flop, he'd have ran into Elijah that day. Or Ahab would have ran into Elijah, not Obadiah. So it's like, is it coincidence? Or is this exactly what God's plan was? That may come back up here a little bit. See, I believe a lot of things we think are coincidences or, just happen. I think if we start seeing God's hand in more things, it may help us in our faith. Verse 8. Yes, he replied, go tell your master Elijah is here. What have I done wrong? Asked Obadiah. Okay, now we're starting to see the real world faith issue. Okay, so Obadiah, second command, right? He only answered to the king. The king to me seems to even protect Obadiah, a clear, devout follower of God, from his wife, the queen, Jezebel. Okay? He even protects him from that. And he has hidden these prophets in caves and fed them for this 3-year window of time we're talking about. That's pretty risky in my mind. But he did that. They're looking for water. They're going to the normal spots to try to see what brooks have dried up and what places have water still. He runs into Elijah, which he has not seen in this 3.5-year window, because last he saw Elijah's saying it's not going to rain except by the Lord's command. He shows up. He sees Elijah, and he shows Elijah respect and honor. He bows down before him. Like he knows who Elijah is. He's not mad at Elijah because he understands we're the nation, we're disobeying God, and then God's angry, and this is God's judgment. He gets all that. He bows down before Elijah, and he's like, is this you, really you? Because he's probably scruffy, you know what I mean? Like, he's hiding out with a widow lady, right? Come in, and Elijah says, hey, I need you to go tell the king that I'm here and we need to talk. The dude's been hiding prophets in the cave, all right? And the first thing out of his mouth is, what have I done wrong? Like, what are you thinking? He's having this crisis of belief all of a sudden. This moment, like, what? That makes no sense to me at all. Why in the world would I do that? Goes on. Verse 10. Well, he actually says that in verse 9, that you are handing your servant to Ahab to be put to death. That's not what this... You see how your mind can play tricks on you sometimes? Your emotions can be deceptive. I just don't think that Ahab didn't know his right-hand man was hiding prophets in the cave. Maybe he didn't. Maybe this guy was able to get food in the middle of the drought, enough food to feed 50 people for 3.5 years or whatever it happened to be, more than 3 years in the third year. And the king didn't know. Maybe that's all true. I don't know. But yet, in this moment, when Elijah asked for a simple introduction, his brain and his emotions immediately jumped to, what have I done wrong, and why are you trying to get me killed? Verse 10, as surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or a kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever the nation or kingdom claimed that you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go and to my master and say, Elijah is here? Like you've been here the whole time? Like you're right here, living right here? I don't know where the Spirit, verse 12, I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord will carry you when you leave, or when I leave. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Why? Like, wouldn't that be like ratting him out, right? Like, dude, I saw Elijah today. He was over here. And then we show up and it's like, okay, he's not here now. Let's go find him. See, his mind and his emotions are playing tricks on him. Yet I, your servant, have worshiped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? Like, dude, I've done a bunch of stuff. Did you know I was hiding those guys? I've been feeding them. I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and I supplied them with food and water. He was able to supply people, 100 prophets, with water for 3.5 years during a drought, and you don't think the king knew that? Maybe not. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. Yeah, he will kill me. And all Elijah says is, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. What he meant by that was he was just saying to Obadiah, I'm not going to bail on you. I'll be sitting right here when you come back. That's what he was saying. Number one in the outline. Even fully committed Christ followers can find themselves on the struggle bus, especially when caught off guard. Even fully devoted followers of Christ can find themselves on the struggle bus, especially when they're caught off guard. I mean, if you know it's coming, and you can get your head right, your heart right, get prepared, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know it's coming, I'm getting ready for it. You can get you can get a good space, and you're ready to, you answer all your questions, you resolve all your concerns and your fears and your issues, you're ready to step into it. But man, when it comes out of left field, when it's a surprise, like, wow, I didn't see that coming. It catches you off guard. If you're not, they use the phrase prayed up, that kind of phrase. If you're not really kind of current in your connectedness and relationship with Christ, It's hard. It's just hard. It's easy to find yourself on the struggle bus. Just a funny way of saying that we struggle. If you don't think you're ever on the struggle bus, then you're naive. Anytime you find yourself struggling, that's a good definition for you. Kind of make light of it and recognize, yeah, I'm struggling today. I'm on the struggle bus. I'm the one today who needs help. I'm the one today who needs encouragement. I'm the one today who needs to be reminded of God's faithfulness. I'm the one today who needs someone just to encourage me with this phrase or that phrase or whatever it is. I'm the one today who needs to be reminded to persevere. I'm the one today who has been punched in the face by real life, and I'm struggling. It's okay. No, we get discouraged, we get down. It's really no different than Elijah. It's not that it's not, or than Obadiah. It's not that it's not real. It's that our emotions are deceptive. I don't mean they're deceptive as in what we're seeing is not real. Our mind, our thoughts are deceptive. I don't mean what we're seeing is not real in how we think about it. What I'm saying is that we look at the greatness and the powerfulness and the whatever, the majesty of this problem, this circumstance, this situation, and we forget that that is nothing compared to the majesty and the greatness and the powerfulness of God. And it goes back to a couple weeks ago talking about refocused thinking. It's like, bam, life slaps you in the face. You find yourself on the struggle bus. You got to decide, who are you going to listen to? Who are you going to follow? What are you going to believe is true? What your emotions are stirring in you? What the whispers you're hearing say about that? Or what God, His Spirit, is speaking in you? Which do you choose? Because that determines how long you stay on the struggle bus. I'm just in a funk right now. That's called the struggle bus. I'm just really feeling disconnected right now. That's called the struggle bus. I'm just really struggling with name the thing I'm struggling with. That's the struggle bus. It doesn't mean that you're going through a bad time. It just means that somewhere you're struggling. What happens is that we tend to lean, I'll say, assumed trust. We place our trust in other things. Well, I can get past this. I can weather this. I have enough time, energy, money, resources, skills, whatever it is. I can. All of a sudden, it's I rather than God. I don't need God. I got this taken care of. I'm gonna get this done. I'll do this. That's missing the whole point. The moment your mind allows you to believe you don't need God, you're in a very dangerous place, even if life is going really good for you. On your best of days, it's a lie for your mind or your emotions to make you believe you don't need God. On the bad day, then we throw the 911 calls up, right? God! Right? And we expect God to come running like He's our butler. And sometimes God's like, who are you again? It seems like when I've been trying to engage you for the last 6 years, you've ignored me. It seems like that when I asked you to take that next step, when I stirred in you to start taking this step of obedience, you said no over and over and over and over and over again. And then now that you're in a little bit of crisis, you want me? I'm supposed to come respond to you? Some of us are in a 3.5-year drought, using the story, because of our acts of disobedience. Now, I can't preach you out of that. We can't praise service you out of that. There's not a prayer that gets you past what God is doing in you to draw you to Himself. But when you do dumb things and then you double down on dumb things, when you choose to disobey God, okay, by the way, let's back up the train just a little bit. I'm not saying you did bad things. I said dumb things. To the person, according to Scripture, who knows the good they should do, and they choose not to do that, the Bible says to them that is called sin. So when God is stirring you or I to take a next step, and we choose not to, it may not be a bad thing, but it's definitely a dumb thing. It's called sin. And we're doing all the moral stuff. We're nice people, and we're good to people, and we're kind, and we're generous to people, and we're just good people. Okay, but then you get down here to this 911 time, God! And then we look back, and what we have is a long history of disobedience, ignore God, do what I want to do, live my life the way I want to live it, until there's a crisis. And when there's a crisis, I'm expecting God to jump and run. Don't you think there were believers that were living through this 3.5-year drought? Because the entire nation is going through it, right? That were like, dude, this is my animals that are dying. This is my crops that aren't going to make this year. Don't you think there were some believers in God going through the exact same thing? They weren't all like, yes, God's getting them now. Like, God, could you make it just rain on my property and leave the rest of them alone? I mean, they're all going through it, right? I mean, even the miraculous stuff that happened in chapter 17 where Elijah and the widow lady and her son are being fed miraculously, right? They never had abundance. It was just that the next day God provided for that. I mean, that's all it was. It wasn't like there was ever a bunch of stuff there. I mean, just imagine. Imagine those prophets, 100 of them, 50 in each of the 2 caves. Can you imagine living in a cave with 50 people for 3.5 years? I don't think that'd be a good day. Right? And hoping that Obadiah brought you some food and water? Maybe. Unless Jezebel finds out and killed him. But you don't really know because you're in the cave. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. When I talk about dumb things or, disobedience, don't go in your, the Pharisee, we have an internal Pharisee we all got, like, well, that's not me they're talking about, that's somebody else. Just remember, from God's perspective, next steps matter. Little things matter. I don't think it's an accident that Obadiah went one way and Ahab went the other way. I don't think it's an accident that the king says, this is so important that just me and my second is going to do this, rather than sending out a bunch of, army scouts. You know what I'm saying? Like, why wouldn't you just do that? No, because this is way important. Like, we got to know. I want my own eyes on it. And there's only one guy I really trust, and that's Obadiah. He's got to go the other way. I don't think that's an accident. I think many things that happen in our lives that we think are accidents aren't accidents. It's God arranging divine appointments. It's God arranging divine opportunities. It's God stirring the hearts of people to do certain things. And we walk right by them because God stirs in us then to take a next step. And we go, I don't want to do that. We don't say they may kill me. Well, they may think I'm weird. What if I'm wrong? I've done some, I've disobeyed, right? I've also done some things. And I've done some things where I was wrong. In the moment, the person said, well, how they responded to me was I was clearly not right. In one particular case I'm thinking about, 2 or 3 years later, whatever it was, a year and a half, whatever it was, a while later, come to find out, he tells me that I wasn't wrong. That it really was God, and he just wanted me to go away because he didn't want to deal with it at the time. Well, it wasn't God. But I walked away thinking it must not be God. And I'm thinking, well, that was stupid. What was wrong with me? But just think about that for a second. Is it possible that God would line up divine opportunities, appointments, conversations, moments for you, stir you to want to respond? It's God who works in you to both want to do and then to do. right? Philippians chapter 2. Is it possible that you're going through your day, your week, whatever, there's something God's stirring in you, and it's no big deal, and you're thinking, well, it's no big deal, and then you just don't do it. But to God, it was a big deal. Elijah could have said, dude, why would I leave here? I'm hanging out with a widow woman, her kid, and you provide food every day. I'm not leaving. Even Obadiah, he's protesting, right? But he and Elijah are going to work through it. I don't know what conversation we're missing here, but him and Elijah work through it, and he goes to his king, and he says, King, it's time for us to go. I found Elijah. You need to go see Elijah. Verse 16 real fast. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and he told him. And Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you, you troubler of Israel? It's someone else's fault. It's not Elijah's fault. It's not God's fault. It's the king and his leadership and the people who followed him. It's the nation's fault. But yet I'm going to blame someone else rather than recognizing I knew it was against God when I made a treaty with Jezebel's dad. I knew it was against God when I built temples to the prophets of Baal. I knew it was against God when I erected poles to Asherah. I knew it was against God the entire time. And instead of me repenting, what I'm choosing to do is blame Elijah that it's not raining. Do you see the difference in the mindset? He could have come and said, Elijah, I'm so glad you're here. I have sinned against God. He didn't. Is it possible that in our own lives there's some moments like that when we're blaming other people, we're blaming other circumstances, other situations, we're blaming whatever we're blaming, and what God is wanting is for people to humble themselves before him and say, God, I need you. I've assumed and put my trust in some other things that aren't you. I thought I could do it myself. I can fix this. I can manage this. I can get through this. When was the last time you humbled yourself before God and just said, God, I need you? It's not by my might and my power, my abilities and myself. It's really by my faith in you. Because outside my faith in you, I've got nothing. That everything around me intimidates me. That everything around me, I'm overwhelmed. I can't meet the challenges in front of me. Even if you're a committed follower of Christ, when life punches you in the face, it doesn't mean you don't find yourself on the struggle bus. If you find yourself on the struggle bus, you got two options. Keep leaning into your own devices, or allow it to cause you to humble yourself before God, to cry out to him. Say, God, here I am. I need you. Number 2 in the outline. It is easy for our faith to waver when we focus on weighing the personal cost and the personal benefits. It's easy for our faith to waver when what we're doing is weighing the personal cost and the personal, or versus the personal benefits. Okay? Now, I'm going to kind of talk about this for a second. Where it said faith to waver, let me put faith in a couple categories. You got faith. Well, I still believe in God. I still believe all the right things. I'm good. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. It's really the application of faith. It's the verb usage of faith that we're talking about. It's easy for I have complete faith in God, but then when God asks me to take a next step, I don't want to. Your faith just wavered. Not your faith in God. Not your belief that he sent Jesus down on a cross for your sin. Not your belief in that. It's not your don't see faith here as belief. Faith is an action. Faith is because I believe, I have the faith to believe I can do this. I can step into this. I can trust God in this. And so God stirs you take a next step and you choose to do it, you're exercising your faith. If God stirs you take a next step and you choose not to, it doesn't matter what your excuses are. I'm not debating that with you. I understand. I got it. I'm a person too, right? It doesn't matter what the process that you're going through. When God asks you to take a next step and you choose no, your faith just wavered. You flinched. The moment was too big for you in your faith. Why? Because your faith is in you or something else rather than in the faithfulness of God. Because your walk with him isn't tight enough, close enough that you trust him. I mean, you trust him, but not in that moment. Somehow we think it's okay to say no to God. Our mind, our heart, our emotions, whatever, they mislead us. And somehow we think it's okay. I'm good people. I went to church. I'm good people. I did this. I'm good people. I did that. And I got you. You're good people regardless of those things. You can still be good people. We're not talking about being good people. We're talking about how do I live a real world faith when some days the world punches me in the face? I don't know if you're paying attention or not, but the world around you is becoming more and more and more and more hostile to people who claim to know Christ as their Savior. There's not going to be a place for the bench setters here shortly. That's where we're headed to. I mean, you're either going to follow Jesus or it's going to get rough. You're going to find yourself in places where it's like, the world's ugly. And there are people who are more and more happy to make fun of you or call you out or reject you or whatever the word may be. I mean, are you okay with that? Do you want to live in the shadows the rest of your life? You want to keep your walk with Christ like Obadiah did, secret? He is Lord. I mean, Obadiah is the devout follower. Obadiah did stuff in the dark, behind the scenes, right? I mean, that's heroic. Obadiah taking 100 prophets when the queen is killing them and hiding 100 prophets in 2 caves, feeding them for 3.5 years, food and water. I'm going to call that heroic. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, that dude didn't just carry that in his backpack and sneak it in. You know what I'm saying? Like that's a task. Feeding 50 people is a lot of people. Feeding 100 people is even, just imagine. He's heroic. He's a beast. Until all of a sudden, God caught him off guard with, hey, go do this. Whoa. What did I do wrong? You trying to kill me? Have you ever caught yourself in that moment? Not that I tried to kill me probably, but why would you put me in that position? Why would you ask me to do that? Why would you ask me to take a step of faith? See, what happens is somewhere between the application of faith and I believe in faith, right? Those two things. There's this crisis of belief that takes place. What do I really believe? Will God provide? I don't know. Somewhere Obadiah switched. We don't know how that happened, right? I'll just say that when he says maybe you'll leave, right, and you won't be here, and Elijah says I'm not going anywhere, I'll be right here. Maybe that's the moment. Wherever the moment is, I don't know, but somewhere Obadiah went from what do you want me to do? Die? He's going to kill me when I tell him this, to okay, I'll follow through and I'll do that. He had a crisis of belief though. That's why he flinched. That's why he hesitated. So we may think it's no big deal. But a crisis of belief that makes me not do a no big deal thing is still a crisis of belief, and it's still causing me to choose sin. It's still causing me to choose to not follow through with obedience. It's still causing me to put something between me and God, an obstacle between me and God. It still puts me in a place where when I need to call 911, God help me, that I turn back and look, and me and God know there's a long list of I didn't do, and I didn't do, and I didn't respond, and I didn't follow through, rather than, Tim, you've always done what I asked you to do. Number 3 in the outline. Consistently taking next steps is the natural progression in our spiritual development journey. Consistently taking next steps. Consistently taking next steps is the natural progression in our spiritual development journey. It's not about I'm just saved, the Spirit of God lives in me, but then we have to grow up in our salvation. We have to mature and develop. Okay? The process God uses is next steps. It's not prayers. Okay, I'm going to pray for you, and when I pray for you, you're a fully mature follower of Christ. That's not how it works. Well, it's 14 prayers. If I pray for you 14 times, then you're a fully devoted follower of Christ. If you just come to church on Sundays, after 6 years, you'll be a fully devoted follower of Christ. After 74 years, that's not how it works. It involves taking next steps. If you choose to come to church every Sunday, you know you're saved. The Spirit of God indwells you. You are a follower of Jesus. Except you refuse to take next steps, you will never, ever, 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 ever develop spiritually. It's a natural part of the process. You don't watch a video on how to hit a curveball and then go hit curveballs. That's not how that works. You got to go out and do it, right? You just don't watch a video on how to follow Christ and how to have trust in him and how to whatever and then just go out and do it. You just don't, it doesn't work that way. You have to take next steps. And God's always walking you toward his plan for you. Remember, God has a list of things he wants to accomplish in our lives, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, that he prepared before you were ever born. And I'm not ready today for what's way down there. Just like I wasn't ready way back there for what's going to happen today. But as God's taking me down a path of next steps, my spiritual development prepares me for a moment. And so whatever's coming, I'm taking next steps because that's a part of my natural process of spiritual development to prepare me for what's coming next or what's coming 3 next down the line. That's true for everybody. Sometimes you get frustrated with yourself, like you kind of beat yourself up, right? Because that's how Satan does it. It's like in the moment, it's no big deal. Whatever it is, no big deal. But then later, he beats you up for it. And then you feel guilty and you kind of kick yourself in the head. I'm horrible, whatever. That's how Satan plays the game. It's great until he talks you into doing something or not doing something, and he flips it on you, and you're a horrible person. If you really love Jesus, you wouldn't do that. You're probably not even saved. I mean, if you were saved, why'd you have that thought? If you were saved, why didn't you do this? If you were saved, why did you do that? You're probably going to hell. I mean, that's how Satan plays the game. So how do you know you're saved? When Satan wants to pull that crap on you. I can see a bunch of next steps back here because the Spirit of God stirred me. I said, yes. I see the activity of the Holy Spirit in my life. I see my failures. I see my home runs. But I recognize that God saved me. He placed his Spirit inside of me as a deposit. I recognize when he asked me to take a next step. And I can tell stories all day about him. Good and bad. That's how you know. Not because there's no bad stories. Number 4. Searching for a guarantee is not the same as living by faith in the faithfulness of God. That phrasing goes back to our Habakkuk series, right? Searching for a guarantee is not the same as living by faith in the faithfulness of God. We're back to that Christ is a belief issue. Like, Obadiah is like, how do I know? He gave him a guarantee. Obadiah needed a guarantee, and Obadiah went and did his thing. Okay, fine. If every time you had, God stirred you and then it was just gloriously perfect, it'd be easy to follow him. But that's also the part of faith, right? It's hard. I mean, a lot of things in life are hard. And most things in life that are hard are actually good for you. Right? Most things in life that are easy are bad for you. It might be fun, but most things in life that are easy are bad. Like weeds grow in concrete. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to grow plants sometimes. Life's that way. But here's the deal, is that when you want a guarantee from God, okay, right, I'll take the next step if you promise me that no one in my family will get sick. Okay. That's not how God operates. Somebody is sick. Okay, God, I'll do this if you'll heal grandma. And it's not how that works. Those are games. Now, you and God, a lot of things can happen in your relationship with God. God can do things with you that are not normal. Okay? But you can't say across the board, this is how God operates. How God operates is he stirs you, he asks you to take a step of faith, right? A next step, and you choose yes or no. That's how it operates. Sometimes God will say to you, like Abraham, if you trust me, I'll make you the father of many nations. See those stars in the universe or stars in the sky? You will have more descendants than the stars in all the universe. Okay? It's like a promise, a this then phrase, a promise that had a little caret at the end of it, right? Okay. Why am I obeying? Well, it's kind of self-serving. I want to be the father of many nations and have more descendants than the stars in the universe. Okay. Sometimes God does that. But I can't sit here and tell you that every time that's how it is. If you'll just take your next step, God always, that's not how it works. Sometimes you take your next step and you step into a hornet's nest because Satan is not happy. It's called spiritual warfare for a reason. Living for Christ in the future is going to be seen more and more as spiritual warfare because it's real. It's not a game, it's real. There aren't guarantees except that I can trust in the faithfulness of God. That's your guarantee. That God's never going to leave me or forsake me. That's your guarantee. That wherever I am, he will be there with me. That's your guarantee. There's no guarantee there won't be a hornet's nest. There's no guarantee you won't lose money. There's no guarantee your family will always be healthy. There's no guarantee there won't be a bad day or a rainy day or real life won't punch you in the face. There's no guarantees of that ever. But you can trust in the faithfulness of God. Number 5 in the outline. Last week's message was on number 5. Number 5 in the outline, and actually it was the first point last week. The test of real world faith is follow through obedience. The test of real world faith is follow through obedience. Everybody can talk a good game in some kind of Christian bubble, some kind of safe bubble in their little home or their church or wherever it is. That's great. That's not real world faith. Anybody can live for Jesus at youth camp. It's not real world faith. Everybody can be reminded of the faithfulness of God when we're singing songs back to back to back about the faithfulness of God. That's not real world faith. Real world faith is more about when life punches you in the face, will you follow through anyway? When you have a crisis of belief, when you're just not sure, when your emotions and your thoughts are misleading you, will you say yes and trust God anyway? Will you choose to follow through faith? Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about this thing God had given us, this power of choice. Ahab blamed Elijah. Bad choice. It wasn't Elijah's fault. Elijah just told him the truth. It was his fault. He led his nation away from God. He led his nation to worship the prophets of Baal rather than the prophets, or worship Baal rather than God. He led his nation to worship the Asherah, or to worship Asherah at the Asherah pole rather than God. He let his treaty-given wife, Jezebel, run the show rather than saying, no, we will choose to follow God. Then when God calls him out by saying, hey, here's the judgment that's coming down. There will be rain. There will be a drought. And it will not rain again until I say so. Rather than falling on his face before God. Rather than humbling himself. Rather than calling like Jehoshaphat did in 2 Chronicles chapter 20 a few weeks ago we talked about. He was alarmed. The first thing he did was he called the whole nation together to fast and focus on God. Right? King Ahab could have done the same thing. He chose not to. God gave him the power of choice. He chose not to. So you have one king that chose to call on God, and we saw God set up ambushes against the enemy of the nation. And then here you see a king who chooses not to surrender himself and call on God. And he goes through 3.5 years of drought. Now just put that in context for your own personal life for a second. He says to Elijah, hey, it's time to go. Elijah's, okay, we'll go. Elijah had a choice to make. He made a right choice. Even if Ahab kills me, I'll go. He goes. And before you think he's a superhero, if you read chapter 19, even after the whole fire God fall thing, which is extraordinary, right? I mean, and the Holy Spirit came upon him, and he outran, because it's getting ready to rain, so they're going back to the house, right? He outran the horse and chariot. I mean, Elijah just had that. That was in chapter 18. Going to chapter 19. In chapter 19, going to 20, he's hiding out. He's suicidal and depressed, hiding under a bush. God was feeding him with a raven. So don't think he's superhero. He's not. He's just a regular person who chose obedience. That's all he did. He chose obedience. Elijah, or Obadiah, he confronts Obadiah. Obadiah had a choice to make too. He chose follow through obedience. Even after the whining stuff, he chose follow through obedience. See, the thing that we struggle with in really living out real world faith is this thing called follow through obedience. That's all we're talking about. Just follow through. That's it. Just follow through. You don't have to do anything for God. Do nothing for God. Just seek him. Just seek him. He'll stir in you what to do. Just say yes. Just make a decision that after all God has done for me, how can I do anything but say yes? And when take a next step. Whatever it is, take that next step. Whatever it is, take that next step. Use your power of choice to honor him because of all he's done for you, because of who he is, because of his faithfulness. See, here's the point I'm trying to get to with that. In all these stories, I just kind of ramped them through real fast. There's the activity of God, and then there's the activity of a person, and then there's the activity of God. So there's a drought. Who did that? That's the activity of God. Then God stirs in people. They have to choose. They choose activity, take their next steps, and then God's response is over here. Now this whole process goes on. Elijah had to say, get the prophets of Baal, right? Elijah had to get them all in the same place. They're all lined up, got the prophets of Baal over here building their thing. They do they dance all day. They're cutting themselves. They're going through all their gyrations over there. Nothing's happening. Elijah's making fun of them, right? You read the story, that's what he's doing. And then he built his own altar, right, to God. And it's like, I can see this happening because I know how it happens in my world sometimes. He's doing this thing, and then he probably didn't even think it was going to happen this way. But he did this thing. He builds an altar. Okay, that's what you normally do. Then he said, cut the bull up. So he cut the bull up, right? Got wood, got stone, got wood, got this bull's up there. Okay, that's all great. And then he has this thought he's supposed to do. Pour water on that. Okay, we already got fire falling from heaven here, God. And you want me to put water on that? Because everybody knows fire doesn't fall from heaven. And they also know, number 2, wet wood doesn't burn. Pour more water on that. Pour more water on that. Pour more water on that. He prayed a 1-verse prayer. God, I'm asking you to do this so the people here know that you alone are God. And fire comes down from heaven, destroys the bull, destroys the wood, stone, all the water. And everyone watching that day knew there was one God. And that he was turning their hearts back toward him. That's our vision in a nutshell. We want God to do the kind of things in and through us as church, that the most cynical person around us recognizes that was God, and that God might be turning their heart back toward him. I can look at some of you, and some of you who aren't in the service today, that you're at other campuses or you're watching online. I can name you names of people who I've watched walk similar processes, where they were far from God, where they didn't believe in God, where they thought that, church was a bunch of, joke or whatever. And I've watched God do things, stir things, respond in ways, and that person to recognize that God was stirring them and turning their heart back toward him. You can't make that up. You can't fake that. Not stories where I talk someone into something, but stories where God just did that. That's what next steps are all about. It's that there's the activity of God, but the next activity of God requires the activity of man. Well, I say yes to a next step. I don't know what the next step is. I got stories for days. I got a window of time where 64 people gave their life to Christ. We baptized 48 of them in a 6-week window of time because an old farmer comes down the middle of an aisle on a Sunday night service. I was preaching. I was a youth pastor. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm preaching. Comes down the middle of the aisle, stands in front of me, great big dude, right? I can't see anybody but him. I'm looking like in his throat, right? I can't see anybody but him. And he says the following sentence. This sounds very spiritual. I have no idea why I'm up here. It really wasn't that good of a sermon. I slept through a lot of it. But I think God told me to. So here's what we're going to do. I'm just looking going. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pray for us, and then I'm going to go over and sit on the front row. He prayed some 2-sentence, non-doing prayer, nothing fancy, old farmer. When he turned like that to go sit down right there, when he turned like that, there wasn't anybody sitting in their seats. Everyone was either coming to the altar or had already knelt at their pews. Over the next 6 weeks, I'd go to a grocery store and someone would say, "Are you Tim Rhodus?" "Yeah." "Can you talk to you about Jesus?" I'd go to a house to hand out flyers for Vacation Bible School. Somebody opened the door and gave them the flyer. And they say, "Hey, are you Tim Rhodus?" "Yeah." "Can you come in and tell me about Jesus?" I can tell you stories for days. I was preaching at church one time in a revival. Walk across the stage like this, saw a handful of teenagers over here. I thought, because I'm having feelings, like pour cold water on it. I went back over here, think it'll go away. Preach a little bit, turn back over here again. I did that 3 or 4 times. I got over here in front of like 6 or 7 teenagers on a Monday night. Maybe it was a Sunday night at church. Must have been Sunday night. And I said, "Hey, Wednesday night," that's the normal youth night. I said, "Is it normal youth night Wednesday night?" "Yeah." I said, "How many kids you normally have at youth night?" And they gave me a number. And I doubled the number in my head. And I said, "If you'll have this many people here that night, I'll buy pizza for everybody." And I'm thinking to myself, that was stupid. Okay. That Wednesday night, they doubled the number. I bought pizza for everybody. Kept thinking the church would bail me out, like I would bail that guy out. Nope, didn't happen. I had to pay for the pizza. It cost me more for pizza and soda than they gave me in a love offering for the revival. I lost money on that deal. 2 days later, I got a phone call from the pastor. Tell me whatever, and I'm thinking he's going to send me a check for the pizza. Nope. There was a guy who came that night and had already written his suicide note. And he was going to kill himself after school in the evening sometime. And somebody at school invited him to come to that night. And he said, he decided that, okay, I'll have one last pizza part. Because he's like, I don't even believe in God. And their friend said, "It's pizza. You believe in pizza?" And yeah, okay, just come. This is for pizza. He told him no. But as he's thinking about it, he said, you know what, I'm going to have one more party with my friends, and then I'll come home and kill myself. And that was the night he gave his life to Jesus. Now, again, I got stories for days. I can tell you stories for absolute days. But let's think about this for a second. If I'm walking this direction, I'm worried about gas money home. I'm worried about paying my bills next week. And I'm using this, I don't know what the number was. I want to say it was 70. Whatever the number was. You have doubled your normal number, I'll buy pizza. I didn't have to say that. But if I hadn't have said that, we would never know. My point is, we would never, ever, 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 ever know that that's the reason that kid committed suicide. But God would. So I'm over here in my little world. God, I got to pay the bills. I don't know back here. But God knows that when I asked you to take a next step, you said no, Tim. You're on the struggle bus because you keep saying no. When you find yourself on the struggle bus, the thing to do is humble yourself. Recognize that this is not about you. It's about the one you serve. And use your power of choice to follow through, to take your next step anyway. So if you're standing right where I'm at, and you just kind of turn and look back symbolically at this window of time, are you taking steps of obedience, or are you resisting God? Are you saying yes, or you just keep saying no? And what's the difference between the activity of God over here and the activity of God over here if you start saying yes when your activity starts backing up what you say you believe? I think that's what the fire of God fall things are all about. Say yes. He's faithful. You can trust him. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I God, like anybody, I have failed. I've struggled. I've resisted. But God, I thank you that we'll just start saying yes. God, your grace is always enough. Your mercy is renewed every day. And when we get our heads around that, rather than that being like a license to say no, God, our only response is, after all you've done for me, how can I say anything but yes ever again? May that be our heart. Hear our worship. Hear our prayers. You see our tears. You know our fears. You know what's overwhelming us right now. God, I pray by your Spirit, you speak into us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let's stand and worship.